ministers and representatives of the government, the members of parliament, senators, and my thanks go to ISPI and to all the authorities who have convened here today. I would like to warmly welcome this fifth edition of the Med Dialogues 2019, which is the main forum for an international discussion on priority issues for the strategic area that is the Mediterranean. I wish to greet also the President of the Republic of Chad. I met him a while ago, and I have met many of the leaders of the Mediterranean yesterday. Now, the reasons which induced the Fernandes back in 2015 jointly with ISPI under the leadership of Minister Gentiloni to create this initiative are ever more important today. The Med Dialogues arise from the awareness of the Mediterranean as being central at the international level and the need to increase the commitment of the international community in this area with the hope that dialogue amongst the politicians, entrepreneurs, civil society in an informal context may contribute to recreating a confidence amongst the parties and stakeholders. And it is important to build bridges that may look to the future with a renewed spirit of cooperation. And today the Mediterranean has become progressively wider, and it goes beyond its shores. It involves the Balkans, the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Gulf. At the same time, it is a fragmented reality where there are non-state bodies like militias, terrorist groups, and networks of criminals that go beyond the national boundaries. At the same time, the Mediterranean, thanks to the infrastructure and discovery of energy resources, has become a platform for global connection. It is an area where the United States have taken a different position compared to the past. From being an ally and a friend, Italy continues to deem it important for the United States to go on being present in the region. The Mediterranean represents a central issue in our discussion with Washington, and in January we will be hosting a new session of the strategic dialogue on the Mediterranean, which is widened, and it will be held with the United States as happened in 2018. The wider Mediterranean is also an area where Russia is becoming increasingly important, and where Russia is an interlocutor that we need to take into account. Mediterranean is an area which is being shaken recently by protest in some of its countries. There's a request for greater political participation and fighting against corruption and the frustration of the younger generations for the economic disparities that exist. Many of the global crises that affect our country arise from the wider Mediterranean. Stability and prosperity of the region are essential conditions for the stability and prosperity of Italy and of the European Union. Cooperation with the countries in the area is of strategic importance, and for this reason, my first bilateral visit was to Morocco. We discussed many issues of common interest, and soon I will be visiting other countries of the wider Mediterranean. Our contribution in the field meets a need for security, which is requested by our citizens. And we pursue this in bilateral and in multilateral meetings and activities. And we are very active in this with a spirit of cooperation and responsibility. At the European level, within the UN setting, and in the G7, within NATO, which has adapted to the challenges that come from the south with the creation of a regional hub in Naples, and also with the OSCE, which thanks to our contribution is now paying closer attention to the south. We are in the forefront. A few days after the swearing in of the new commission within the EU, I would like to say something about the role of the European Union in the Mediterranean. The terrorists and the migration flows that come to our countries are problems that affect everyone, and therefore Europe needs to face these challenges. The Mediterranean, with its crises and opportunities, must become the new historic mission of the European Union. It must become a strategic priority for it. The responses of the new European institutions to these challenges will have an impact on making the European Union a global player. Because, as Aldo Moro used to say, the whole of Europe is in the Mediterranean. Italy's foreign policy in this area is based on is underpinned by three elements. In promoting a new paradigm for the migration flows, promoting a positive agenda for the broader Mediterranean, and seeking to overcome the crises through inclusive political processes. So the political processes must involve all of the players and promote ownership by all the parties involved, from Libya to Syria. From Yemen to Iraq, Italy upholds initiatives under the aegis of the United Nations that aim at facilitating political solutions that are negotiated and inclusive and that provide humanitarian assistance and institutional consolidation. When external and internal factors lead to the collapse of the institutions in a country, we need to create a negotiation framework within which the players may come together. This need is felt in Syria, where the works of the Constitutional Committee are a first step in the right direction. In much the same way, the military option cannot be accepted in the Gulf, where we uphold all diplomatic initiatives that may lead to distension. We are concerned for the gradual Iranian disengagement with regard to the nuclear issue, which is an important instrument for us, and we deem it important to start a negotiation in order to find a new synthesis. The inclusive approach is important also for long-standing crises like the Israeli-Palestinian issue, where we continue to support the two-state solution and that the negotiations be started again between the two parties. The Italian contribution to security in the region is promoted through training missions, international missions, and soon I will be meeting the Italian contingent of UNIFIL within the United Nations, which plays a fundamental role of deterrence along the border between Israel and Lebanon. Our military people are paying a high price for their commitment, and as happened recently in a recent attack in Iraq, and the terrorist threat embodied by Daesh has experienced a harsh blow with the territorial defeat of the caliphate and the elimination of its leader al-Baghdadi. But we will be hosting the Anti-Daesh Coalition, which is a ministerial meeting in 2020. I will be chairing this meeting, and we will continue to fight against terrorism and promote stabilization. Amongst the dynamics underway in the region, Libya is an emblematic case for the multiplicity of the national interests which are at stake, and to understand the integrated approach of our action. The Italian national interest in Libya is linked to principles of unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the country. This goal may be achieved only by promoting dialogue amongst the different political souls that are present in Libya and amongst the international players that are mostly involved. And this is the spirit with which we organized the conference in Palermo in 2018, and that I co-chaired in September with our French colleague, and a meeting in New York, a ministerial meeting on Libya, which represented a first important step towards a greater cohesion at the international level on the Libyan issue. And always in an optic and a standpoint of inclusion, that I will be chairing the ministerial meeting of the neighboring countries of Libya, which involves our partners that are involved in the crisis. This is a way for having their voice heard at the international conference, which will be held in Berlin, and that it was promoted by the special representative Salameh, on which we are working actively. In the current Libyan situation, which sees increasing recourse to arms that are constantly more and more sophisticated, and foreign mercenaries are involved, we are working along three lines. We would like to invite the parties to avoid further escalation and achieve a ceasefire agreement, start a political dialogue, and promote cohesion of the international community in order to ensure full support for the actions of the United Nations. And we want all external violation and external interference to stop. We intend to strengthen the bilateral cooperation with the Libyan institutions within the framework of the memorandum signed in 2017, a memorandum that has so far led to reducing the number of people who die in the waters and the sea. We also want to improve and make more effective the issue of respect for human rights by involving the United Nations. So this goal is in line with our intention of promoting a new paradigm for managing migration flows. It is indispensable to strengthen the dialogue and partnership with the African countries. And thanks to the Fund for Africa, the Fernandes is financing a number of projects for capacity building at the local level and for assisting refugees and migrants. We protect the more vulnerable migrants and assist them in returning to their countries. We support the local communities, and we support information campaigns on the risks of irregular migrations. And all this is done in collaboration with the International Organization for Migrations and the High Commissioner for Refugees that we want to involve in the Central Mediterranean. Partnership with the countries of origin and of transit requires bilateral agreements on migration matters. This was one of the objectives of my recent mission to Rabat, and one of the objectives of the intense work we are doing together with Tunisia, which I will be visiting soon. These are countries with which we want to continue to work, also on regular migration, so as to loosen the pressure of irregular migration. We want to speed up the readmission procedures and make it easier to integrate those who have the right to stay in the European countries. And in this is the direction of the decree on safe countries that we adopted on the 4th of October. So Italy is strongly committed to welcoming refugees, and today we are the only European country that helps refugees to leave Libya, more than 900, and have been helped so far. And the humanitarian corridors have been set up, which have led to the arrival of 500 people during the last 3 years. So we're aware of the importance of acting on the deep causes for migration, and we want to fight against irregular migration. Italian cooperation is a fundamental instrument for promoting consolidation in democratic processes and in the institutions, protection of human rights, and strengthening of basic services and creation of new jobs. This is a commitment that in 2018 turned our interventions for aid to development for an amount of 280 million euros in sub-Saharan Africa, 112 million in the Middle East, 80 million euros in the Balkans, and 60 million in North Africa. So in working for stabilizing the crises and consolidating more inclusive and equitable and fair societies that respect human rights and to act on the deep causes of migration flows, we are aiming at promoting a positive agenda for enabling all this. I would like to dwell on a few aspects of a positive agenda, that is the economy, energy, environment, innovation, and culture. With regard to the economy, the Mediterranean is a market of 500 million consumers, where more than 20% of the world maritime traffic takes place, and 450 harbors, ports, and terminals, and a great strategic hub for energy, safety, and security. The goal that Italy has is to contribute to relaunching the vitality of the Mediterranean as a platform for connectivity between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The interest of Asian countries for the Mediterranean, and we're going to be speaking about this, is an opportunity that Italy wishes to seize, as demonstrated by the agreement that was signed with China and the Memorandum of Understanding on the new Silk Way, and the recent support of Italy as a dialogue partner to the Indian Ocean Rim Association. This latter framework will develop important synergies of priority importance, like the blue economy. Italy's contribution to the growth of the Mediterranean, and the wider Mediterranean in particular, may rely on the support of the private sector. After Europe, this region is the nearest area to our production system, with over 1,200 companies that are active in the area and almost 47 billion in investments in 2018, a presence which has grown in the last 10 years at a very strong rhythm. And this shows that there is an economic vitality in the region that is high in spite of the crises. It is time to promote the competences in exports and commercial negotiations at the Farnesina. So for a country like ours, where export accounts for more than 30% of our GDP, the internationalization of companies is a prime factor that we must rely on and support growth. New opportunities will emerge from the Dubai Expo in 2020. The Italian pavilion that I presented last October in Matera with my colleague from the Emirates, Sheikh Al Nahyan, is called Beauty Unites People. Beauty brings people together. And we propose our country as a hub of innovation. And now energy. Energy continues to be an economic lever in the broader Mediterranean. This is a region from which 2/3 of our oil supplies come from, and more than half of our natural gas supplies come from here. And the main Mediterranean producers, the routes from the Caspian Sea and the Gulf, are involved in a part of the Mediterranean. Cooperation with the countries in the area become increasingly important with regard to energy diversification and in the transition towards renewable energy. We are convinced that only within a framework of regional cooperation is it possible to unblock the potential of the area with benefits that can go to all in terms of stability, prosperity, and security. This is an approach which leads to advantages for all the stakeholders, all the parties that are involved. Environment. Cooperation in energy matters goes hand in hand with the environment. Italy is in the forefront with regard to the climate change and fighting against climate change, and we have reached and even surpassed the European goals set for 2020. And we have ensured opportunities of growth for the companies and protection of the environment. So with this credibility, we, together with the United Kingdom in 2020, we will be chairing the 26th Conference of Parties of the Framework Conference on Climate Change of the United Nations, that is COP26, where we will be hosting also the COP of young people to listen to the requests and the needs of the younger generations. And we will also pay special attention to the African continent. And now science, culture, and innovation. In a region where more than 50% of the population is under 25, it is of fundamental importance to invest not only in economic terms, but also cultural terms, and to promote the potential of all the social stakeholders. It is our objective in the long term, through science, culture, and innovation, to recreate in the region an environment that is conducive to a creative exchange, to use the words of the Moroccan poet Mohamed Menis, and perpetuate the essence of the Mediterranean as a common house. These are the initiatives that the Farnesina will be promoting: protection of cultural heritage and artistic heritage, an area where we have leading expertise, to aid given to technological innovation. And these are factors that relaunch the Mediterranean, which is a region that is part of the world order. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We start next session right away. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat as we are starting right now next session. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please ask you to take your seats? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, it is a huge pleasure to welcome you to this first session of Rome Med 2019. Benvenuti, ahlan wa sahlan. My name is Bethany Bell, although I should say that in the Middle East they call me Buthena. We have an eminent panel with us this morning. I'm very happy to introduce General John Allen, the president of the Brookings Institution in the United States. We have the Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abulghait. We have the caretaker Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigrants of Lebanon, Gibran Vassil. And we have Mohsin Jazouli, the Minister Delegate for African Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Morocco. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being with us today. Now, we're soon going to be able to hear from our very distinguished panelists, but first, before we begin, I would like to set you all a little task. We're going to make you work this morning for a moment. Our colleagues here at ISPI have prepared an instant survey. We want your ideas. Now, we have it, you see right up here. What do you think are the top risks for geopolitical stability in 2020? Is it 1, mass street protests and social uprising? 2, climate change and resource scarcity? 3, tensions in the Gulf? 4, the revival of ISIS? 5, uncertainty of political successions in key states of the region? Nuclear proliferation? Or the increase of internally displaced people? Now, we want to know what you think are the biggest risks, and how you will let us know is you should now, we hope, have all downloaded the MED app. Have you done so? If you haven't, please do it now. And that is where you can access the survey, and please rank which you think are the biggest risks that we're facing in the region in the next year. And then at the end of this session, we'll be able to announce what the result of this instant survey is, and then perhaps next year see whether we were right or not. And now, without further ado, I would like to move to the subject of our panel this morning. The Middle East and Northern Africa, which is an area which is extremely close to my own heart. I've spent a significant part of my journalistic career there, and also I spent most of my childhood in the region as well. It remains, unfortunately, a region marked by conflict and a struggle for regional hegemony. We look at the ongoing civil wars, Syria, Yemen, the violence in Libya and Iraq, and fueling the competition between local players and external ones. We think of the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the United States and Iran, the United States and Russia. The list could go on. This is a very, very complicated region. Now, we thought we would begin this session by asking General John Allen to set the scene for us, perhaps, to give us an overview, possibly, of how we might want to try and move from a situation of competition to possibly more collaboration. General Allen, please, very much like you to take the stand.
Well, Bethany, thank you very much for moderating this panel. And it's wonderful to be on a panel with such distinguished colleagues. Secretary General, it's wonderful to see you again, sir. And thank you for your continued leadership in the region, as well as our other friends and colleagues as well. It goes without saying that the difficulties of this region continue, in many respects, unabated. I think Gianpiero Massolo and Foreign Minister Di Maio articulated them well. And as we think through the processes that we face today, the alternatives and even the opportunities, the challenges will be really dramatic in terms of leveraging opportunity in that region to achieve some hope for a positive outcome. let's just remind ourselves where we find the situation today. The reverberations of the so-called Arab Spring, which is a terrible term, still, in many respects, dominate the landscape of the region. The sadness that emerged from that in the context of civil wars, destabilized governments, energized populations which in some respects still experience massive unfulfilled senses of opportunity. That resonates still across the region, and we're seeing it again on the streets in Tehran, in the streets of Baghdad. We're seeing it across the region again as elements of the population are taking to the street to once again demonstrate a dissatisfaction with the environment in which they are existing. The challenge that we have, of course, is that, as was said so well by the foreign minister, 50% of the population of the region is 25 years of age or less. So we have a real demographic challenge that has to be addressed as we go forward. And a number of things, I believe, create opportunities for us here to consider ways in leveraging the challenges of the region ultimately to try to find an optimistic outcome. That demographic reality gives us an opportunity to marshal the youthful enthusiasm and the youthful capabilities of huge amounts of the population in the region. It gives us an opportunity on behalf of women in the region to incorporate them increasingly due to their youth and their exposure more broadly to educational opportunities and a greater role in the societies of the region in varying mixtures, of course. This is an opportunity that we should be grasping. As the youth ultimately are engaged in the future, they can become part of the solution rather than, as we found it in 2011, a large part of the problem. And the problem wasn't theirs. The problem was the unfulfilled expectations of the youth from governments that were unresponsive, which in many respects is why they're in the streets again. Here is an opportunity for us in the region to leverage the youth of this dynamic, of this generation, to be part of the solution, and I think they're ready. A second area is in innovation, technology innovation, and I've been very pleased to see across the region that there has been active work by many of the governments, particularly in the Gulf, but governments across the region to become centers of innovation and to try to create opportunities for the youngsters, the young generation, to be part of an innovative future where this region can move from being a locus of conflict to a locus of opportunity. And I think innovation and emerging technologies give that youth an opportunity we've never seen before, and the rest of the world should be doing all it can to partner with the governments of the region to try to create these opportunities. Another area, of course, is climate. I'm deeply concerned about the trends in climate. I sadly believe we're going to head well past 2 degrees centigrade in climate change and increased global warming. This is going to create specific challenges for the region, which is another opportunity for us to find multilateral opportunities and multilateral engagements where we can work together to both manage the changes which are inevitably coming from climate and to where we can mitigate the effects as well. But the challenges that we face in the region are enormous. The civil wars, as I've talked about, in Libya, Syria, Yemen, and to a lesser extent, and resolved to some extent in Iraq, that's a very difficult situation right now. Those are frozen conflicts. Particularly the Syrian civil war has taken a dramatic turn, especially with the U.S., largely the U.S. departure, and the decision by the president to withdraw American support with the exception of some security in the oil fields. We see the persistence of the Saudi and the Iranian Cold War. And the results of that has been widespread across the Gulf, to include more recently attacks on shipping in the Gulf, ultimately the attack on the Abqaiq oil and gas separation facility in eastern Saudi Arabia. These are provocations and these are events which really strike at the tenuous and very difficult stability of the region. We see the continued virulent threat of jihadi movements such as the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. They are still very virulent, even though we can point to the fact that a major setback has been dealt to the Islamic State. That remains a dangerous entity, as does Al-Qaeda. But also we should acknowledge that many of the conditions, the human conditions, which radicalize large segments of populations across the region and push them into the arms of extremists, those conditions still exist. And they deserve our attention, and they deserve our support outside the region to help governments to try to resolve this. And of course, we still have the unresolved Israeli-Palestinian situation. It's a very difficult situation, and for me, while American administrations, one after another, have been committed to a two-state outcome, which in my mind there can be no other outcome, the most recent and the current administration seems to be quite ambivalent on that issue. In my mind, peace seems elusive now, but I will never give up on the possibility of a secure Israel and a sovereign, independent, and secure Palestine. And I think we all have to be committed to that in the future. Finally, the great power presence in the region ought to be leveraged as much as we possibly can to create those opportunities for multilateralism. Sadly, U.S. policy decisions and the apparent trajectory of the United States would appear to be removing us as a convening and a centralizing force. That's been a traditional role of the United States in that region, and decisions as represented by the American departure from the JCPOA, the precipitous decision in northeast Syria, and other relevant decisions with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian situation has deteriorated the role of the United States in having the moral authority to be the convening element within the region that can create opportunity. Meanwhile, we see the ascendancy of Russia. Russian influence is expanding in the region, not just in Syria on behalf of Bashar al-Assad, but in terms of arms sales and a deepening relationship with various Arab states throughout, and of course is an ally to Iran. And finally, of course, China. In its quiet and deliberate way, China continues to increase its influence in the region through foreign direct investment, through scholarships, through the Belt and Road Initiative, and through a persistent intent to try to create a stabilized region from which the energy that emits from the Middle East can continue to fuel the economy of the Middle Kingdom. There are many dynamics. We should be looking in every possible way, Bethany, for those opportunities for us to create multilateralism, a common vision for the future, and to leverage those things we know are available to us now.
Thank you very much indeed, General Allen. We'll be returning to some of these themes a little bit later in the discussion, but first I would like to invite Ahmed Abulghaid, Secretary General of the Arab League, to give us a few remarks as well.
Yes, thank you very much. If I may say honestly, that when I read the title of that panel from confrontation or competition, from competition to collaboration, I felt that that does not really reflect the real situation in this region. Because in my view, the real title should be Conflict and Failure. Allow me please to dissect briefly, very briefly, the situation and then what had happened and then a possibility for plotting a course to come out of that very dire situation. I would say that a part of a tall agenda of problems, there are possibly 4 paramount problems. You have Palestine, and thank God that the general made reference to. There is no settlement for Palestine, the mother of all problems. Then you have Libya, where contending forces, at least 4, are contending the future of the country in a civil war. Terrorist groups, local forces, regional powers, as well as global powers. Same thing is happening in Syria. Maybe it's the same players or give and take 1 or 2. And then finally, Yemen, where an aggressive Iran is pushing everybody to a conflict. How did we reach that point? I say that the failure of settling the Palestinian problem is really the core issue. And we have been saying all along in the region for decades and decades, be careful. You are angering a whole region. Find a settlement. And here it is, 30 years from today, someone will come and say, where did we go wrong? Sir, you went wrong because of what you are doing to the Palestinians right now. Right now, with the recognition of East Jerusalem, or Jerusalem with the recognition of the occupation. Second issue is the interventions. The foreign interventions, starting from 2003, the invasion of Iraq, the destruction of the Iraqi state, then 2011, and thank God that the general is saying the wording, spring, it is destruction, general, destruction. That, of course, destroyed or threatened to destroy the states, the nation state in the region. The nation state, when it disappears, you create a vacuum. And as you created a vacuum, the neighbors, as well as the global, as well as the local, as well as the terrorists, they act and they try to capture the seat of power. We have to find a way. And people are relying on the hegemon, the United States. And the United States is uncertain. Uncertain. It behaves one day taking a certain course, second day it reverses its position. So what to do? Then the failure of the nation state itself, the failure to reform, and the region needs reform, needs political, needs economic, needs social, needs a reform. And there has been a failure over decades and decades. That also added to the situation. You made reference, General, to the demographics. The demographics are clear. 60% of the Iraqi population is below 20 years old. 60%. So, what to do? I think we have to find a way for settling the Palestinian problem. because Palestine is responsible for so many ills that have happened over decades and decades. And sadly, the European and the Western mind doesn't understand the effect of Palestine on the ethos of the region. Find a Palestinian settlement. Also, find a settlement with the Iranian, and it is good that you made reference to the GCPOA, because we need to complement it, we need to work it, we need to change Iranian behavior. And you change Iranian behavior by guaranteeing, but also stopping them and reaching an arrangement. You need to have economic revival of the region. And in order to have an economic revival of the region, you need to put at its disposal billions and billions in order to revive the nation state. Without a nation state in the region, that situation will prevail over an extended period of time. So you need to bring to an end the foreign intervention. Maybe a good piece of news that the Islamists who tried to capture through violence and force has been defeated. What I feel watching the scene across the region, I come to the conclusion that even the neighbors who are intervening right now in the regional affairs also will be defeated, and the nation state will be revived. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Again, an enormous amount of food for thought, but first of all, I'd like to invite Gibran Bassil, the caretaker Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lebanon, to make a few remarks.
I was asked to prepare a word in Arabic, so if you allow me to deliver it from there.
I don't need it.
أصحاب السعادة سيداتي سادتي يقع لبنان.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to speak about the international crossroads of the Mediterranean as a crossroads of religions, of nationalities, and all of these lines that cross each other make Lebanon a country that acts and interacts with events, and it undergoes influences. Lebanon is at the heart, at the crossroads of all of these lines. It could either be a point of disjunction or of union, depending on what it wants for itself. And the Lebanese, even if they do not agree, well, most of them want Lebanon to be a bridge. And then there's also what others want from Lebanon, and here there are different interests at stake. Lebanon, for its geographic position, for its internal makeup, and for its civilization, is a country of Arab identity, an Oriental, an Eastern country, but it is attracted by the West. So there are those who want it to be more oriented towards the East and pull it away from the West. Others instead want it to come closer to the West. But we want a Lebanon that should be a bridge between the West and the East, a country that welcomes all those who have peace in their hearts. Lebanon is a pluralistic country. It is at a crossroads of dialogue and of conflicts. The Jews, the Christians, and the Shiites, but we want it to be a forum of dialogue for religions, not an area, a place of crisis and of clashes. It is also close to the Israeli-Palestinian situation, or the Arab Saudi, Turkish conflicts. Well, we want Lebanon to be a place where fair solutions can be found and which guarantees security, peace, and so Lebanon cannot interact with the larger powers because it is seen as a country that it fuels the conflicts between Russia and America. On the other hand, Lebanon plays a role in the good neighborhood policy promoted by Europe, and we want it to be the sensitive compass so that the points of contact that we have may be points of opening, of windows that can open up in the Mediterranean, promoting culture, tourism, and trade. So all of these interacting lines have caused friction in our country and on its borders. It has produced crises and wars and destruction and blood. Lebanon has suffered from all of this. It has never had any advantage from the tragedies, but it has paid dearly for the crises that are being drawn out. Many Palestinians have refugees, Syrian refugees have been in our country now for more than 17 years. The displaced, the refugees account for almost 40% of our population. It's as if the US were to have 130 million displaced people. The concentration of refugees and displaced persons, 200 people per square kilometer. It's as if Italy were to bring in 60 million displaced people. Lebanon has become a world champion in welcoming refugees and displaced people. In fact, we have been given the World Cup of welcome, but we are actually given only some drops of water, which is not enough to quench our thirst. So the Lebanese have not succeeded in managing the crises and protecting their borders, and not even in strengthening the country from the repercussions from the outside, which cause 30 billion in damages because the Lebanese people have lost their businesses, their jobs that have been taken over by the foreigners with the support of the international community. We have always felt that this economic difficulties will undermine our economy, and what we see now along the borders where there is the Syrians are coming into the country more and more because of the economic crisis, an economic crisis that has led many Lebanese of different political thoughts and religious creeds to protest. They are protesting against the government because of the corruption, because of the corruptions in the institution that have led to these precarious situations that inducing Lebanese people and those who are hosted in our country are inducing them to leave the country. So some Lebanese have become accustomed to leaving their country when there are these crises. Some are happy to leave and to find a place in other countries. There are 14 million Lebanese who are well integrated in other countries, who have left the country over the last 150 years. But if they were all to leave, then Lebanon will no longer exist, and this will be a harsh blow for us and for you, because Lebanon protects you from terrorism. It absorbs many blows and many crises. The people that are hosted in Lebanon will want to leave as well to look for a better life or for extremist reasons. And they will therefore invade your countries, bringing their problems with them. And this will create more chaos. And so you will have a crisis which is similar to the Syrian crisis. If they succeed in destroying the country, and this promotes extremism as well. So many, the enemies will be in your midst, and the internal balances of your countries will be undermined. So Lebanon is a country that has achieved its balance, and it does not want it does not want to be destroyed. It doesn't want a civil strife, civil war, because in that case there would be no winners. So our path, so this is what I can say about our situation. Now, unilateralism in the world has never lasted, and there's no place for it in Lebanon. Lebanon cannot be monopolized, but it must be open to all. And Europe must play its role as a compass, as a promoter of settlements and of peace. So we must promote prosperity rather than strife. Resolution 1701 has ensured stability along the Lebanese borders, and so Lebanon is capable of defining its conflicts and its borders, its land borders, its maritime borders, without foregoing its rights. And it can do this under the aegis of the United Nations and with the support of the United States in order to ensure an equilibrium and use its resources for relaunching the economy. So Lebanon does not want to participate in external problems, but the external forces should not drag Lebanon into more conflict and then punish Lebanon for having taken part in initiatives promoted by foreign countries. This is a geopolitical context which is difficult, and I ask you to provide us with some support to move away those who interfere with our internal affairs. We need Lebanon to be able to emerge from its crisis without extremisms, without chaos and internal conflict. And Lebanon can be an example of coexistence and a country that preserves the dignity of its citizens. So we say to Lebanon, if your neighbor is thriving, then you can thrive as well. But I say beware, because the East is not at all healthy. There's new chaos that is being created. So do not make the mistake of seeing do not intervene to induce these societies to be blown up, because this leads to terrorism, hatred, and this will affect the whole of the Mediterranean. So efforts that are made in favor of change could lead to extremism and cause more displaced people. Whereas if we work for peace, we work for creating jobs and reconstituting the economic fabric of the country, then this will generate peace. and an internal dialogue will ensure this, and whereas conflict will lead only to further despair, immigration, only dialogue is the solution, it's the way out. If dialogue is not adopted, then we will lose, and Lebanon will be the big loser.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. I would now like to invite Mohsin Jazouli as well to give us a few words. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I am pleased to represent my country, the Kingdom of Morocco, at this meeting, which focuses on a key theme that perfectly summarizes the challenges of the MENA region. I would like to thank the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and as well as the Italian Institute of International Political Studies for organizing this 5th edition, which revolves around the theme Beyond Turmoil, a Positive Agenda. In this world that is undergoing unprecedented transformations in all areas, the sources of turmoil are numerous. Faced with this turbulence, the mechanisms and tools of diplomacy and global governance lack efficiency and responsiveness. The region we are talking about today is a perfect illustration. It is the place that crystallizes all the challenges and issues. The MENA region is today characterized by disputes of all kinds, by the exacerbation of sectarian tension and socio-economic difficulties. It's also the theater of violent conflicts and confrontation between foreign actors and interests. These challenges and issues make this region the land of both all complexities and possibilities. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about complexities, we talk about the social inequality and disqualified youth composed by talented men and women who do not find a place on the job market because the economies have not been sufficiently diversified. When we talk about complexities, we are talking about these huge financing needs that do not find investors in a region where wealth is coveted. When we talk about complexities, we are talking about this lack of political, economic, and social cohesion, which affects the region despite the deep cultural, historical, and religious links that should unite countries. In this context, we cannot be satisfied with declarations. We must mobilize to create the necessary conditions for new dynamics with a roadmap backed by a positive agenda that aims to achieve peace and stability for the well-being of the populations. It is in this perspective that we must rethink an effective and balanced multilateralism to foster synergy and resolve problems with the appropriate means to fulfill its mission both regionally and internationally. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in Morocco, in spite of a difficult regional and international climate, we have managed, under the leadership of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, to lay the foundations of a national development model. This model is based primarily on strengthening democratic institutions, inclusive economic growth, and human development. On this basis, Morocco acts and evolves in its region with a diplomacy whose method is responsibility and clarity. A diplomacy that aims to strengthen ties in a spirit of brotherhood and solidarity with all partner countries and friends. This makes Morocco a credible partner for building peace. Moroccan policy in this area is expressed through tangible regional initiatives that are all pushing towards consolidating political, economical, and diplomatic ties. As an example, I would like to mention the Skhirat process to promote peace and stability in Libya, which resulted in an agreement on the political transition concluded in Skhirat in Morocco in 2015. In the commercial field, I will emphasize on the Agadir Agreement in Morocco, signed in 2001 by Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, that entered into force in 2007 to create an Euro-Mediterranean free zone. The ultimate goal is to increase the export capacity of these countries to the European Union. In the diplomatic field, I can underline the 5+5 dialogue. This annual meeting of foreign ministers has gradually spread to other areas such as defense, transport, migration, energy, culture, and education. To go beyond the idea of one Mediterranean side facing the other, Morocco proposed in January 2019 the establishment of a Mediterranean G10 that will allow to understand the joint teams. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to put our region a virtuous path, that of peace and prosperity, we must work to build sustainable and pragmatic partnerships within the framework of a vision integrating discussion and action to facilitate the start of an active diplomatic process. There is an urgency here because our hesitations can be interpreted as a weakness that leaves room for misunderstandings. In our interdependent, interconnected world, the news doesn't wait. To prevent the outbreak of events and the outbreak of conflicts, the mechanisms for collaboration and partnerships must be strengthened. This is what we are trying to do through this meeting. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Thank you very much indeed to our distinguished panelists. There is so much food for thought within those. And for the remainder of this discussion, I would, if you will allow me, like to invite you into my world, which is the world of broadcast and short answers, so that we can cover as many topics as possible. To begin with, if I may, we're looking at the moment at the protests in Lebanon, in Iraq, Iran, Algeria, Sudan. Is this moment chapter 2 of the uprisings of 2011? And if so, how should it be dealt with? And how do we leverage the youth, as General Allen put it? A concrete suggestion, perhaps, from each of you on those thoughts. Perhaps, Secretary General, if we could begin with you, please.
You see, the issue is there has been mistakes, failures, and the mistakes and failures lead usually to uprisings, upheavals, turmoil, and tension. I see that the governments, whether in Iraq or the authorities in Lebanon, are dealing with the issue wisely. Of course, it is obvious that both populations are objecting to, first, foreign presence, and it is obvious, even in Iraq, even in the south of Iraq, it is obvious. Hopefully, that the situation would be pacified through measures, through reform, through understandings, through concessions, through meeting halfway to change the dynamics of the two societies.
How do we do that, though? If I could perhaps ask you, Mohsin Jazouli, are there concrete measures that you have been implementing in Morocco that you see as a way of leveraging youth, of trying to meet the demands of this young population?
Very short answer, because you need very short answer.
I didn't answer shortly.
You did it well, very well. During the last 20 years, we had answers to Moroccan population with the sectorial strategies, with the very concrete, huge project, as Morocco became today a role model in Africa and maybe in Mediterranean. And we, even after those 20 years, after giving answer, we have now new questions, and we are the king is asking a question to Moroccans to find a new model of development, economic development, socio-economic development, because we do not need to wait for new questions to find new answer. So we have started a new question, and we are now working on a huge program, which is the next 20 years program for Morocco. As we have given answers, we need now to give the future answer for the future questions.
How would you now apply this to Lebanon? How are you trying to leverage the youth to deal with the protests which are happening right now?
You know, I think that we have failed in Lebanon through our political system to abide by the aspirations, not only of the youth, but also of the old generations. Everybody is desperate of a failed state or of a failed system that we are offering to our people, and people are really righteous to go to the streets to demonstrate. They don't lack democracy in Lebanon. They don't lack freedom. They don't lack human rights, you know. No, there's plenty of this. They like a well-being that is up to their dignity and to their standards in a diverse and an open society like Lebanon. That's why it is an opportunity in Lebanon. It's not a crisis. If we all together know how to take advantage out of it in reforming the system, you know, and fighting corruption, and really providing the development needed for a country like Lebanon. And it can turn into a nightmare if we allow the interventions from outside. Because talking of Lebanon and linking it to other countries in the region in a purely internal matter, you know, which is the need for the people for a better living, because we have a very bad economic situation and a deep financial crisis. So why to link it with the aspirations of the people for more freedom in Lebanon, where they are, of course, freely allowed to demonstrate and express their opinion, and going to elections also. So linking it in a bigger regional context is really harming. This is not a colored revolution. This is a Lebanese nation-made revolution, you know, and we have to deal with it as such in order to take advantage of that uprising that is really needed to reform the system, and not driven somehow by people trying and failing until now to manipulate it in order to settle some accounts in the region. This will lead to a political chaos. This will lead to a chaos that will really harm the country and put us on another strand. We want a spring coming out of this, not a cold winter.
General Allen, you mentioned in your speech leveraging the youth. Do you see this as chapter 2 of the Arab uprisings of 2012?
It could be.
11?
It could be. Again, chapter 1, if you will, or I view this always as a tsunami, and tsunamis come in waves. And the first wave almost wiped away much of the political elite of the region, or destabilized the institutions across the region in many ways. One of the things that occurred in 2011 and is occurring again, and we could lose control of it very quickly, is that these movements were magnified and accelerated by social media. And what's happening here is the unfulfilled aspirations of youth across the region from political elites that are insensitive to their quality of life and their aspirations for education and economic security and equal rights. That insensitivity to those aspirations is what's bringing people into the street. And to the Secretary General's comment, it's about reform. Now, that's an easy thing to say. It's much harder in practice to realize. But for the regime elites to not engage the youth in these movements, to find out what their concerns are, what their complaints are, and begin the process of an active dialogue with the youthful elements of the society, as has been successful in Morocco, for example, where the engagement resulted in tangible, observable programs that gathered in the enthusiasm of the youth, gathered in the innovation of the youth, and channeled it into something that could buoy the whole society. If the regime sees the youth in the street as a threat and seeks to eradicate the movement, then that will result in utter failure. If the regime sees the youth in the street as an opportunity for change, here is the change for both reform and, again, the youthful population could be easily radicalized, and we can't stand that any longer in the Middle East. And that radicalization can, in fact, be transformed, those powerful forces, into realizing the aspirations of the youth. And here is the opportunity. And this should be seen that the movements in the street are the earliest stages of what could be broad reform or the second wave of the tsunami.
Very interested, thank you very much, to pick up on the point of these concrete steps to engage youth, also perhaps to engage more women. If you could perhaps expand on what has been done in Morocco, one or two very concrete examples.
What we have done in Morocco, and of course since 2011, when you have questions, the answer must be, of course, political, social, and economical, and not a military answer. Right. So that's the first point, which is very important, and today more than ever. What we have done in Morocco, so in 2011 we have changed the constitution, and it helped the young generation, which is now also the millennial that have needs. We help them to create jobs, to create enterprise, the entrepreneurship was in the heart of the solution. So we have started many sectorial strategies on tourism, on industry, on agriculture, that created jobs, because we need to create jobs to answer to those young people. And today Morocco has become, of course, a touristic destination, as you may know, but also an industrial destination. As today we have automotive parks that employs youth people. We have aeronautic park also. Now today, in each plane who is flying, you have a Moroccan part, which is built by a young Moroccan who has been a young entrepreneur in Morocco.
I've just got to ask the two of you as well. Do you see these as things that one could implement in Lebanon, in Egypt, say, in other countries in the region? Such plans?
Of course. Lebanon, you know, we have a very dynamic society, a high spirit of entrepreneurship, and people in Lebanon don't lack nor the ambition nor the capacity nor the resilience, you know, to move to a productive economy. But we need to put them in a context of a rule of law, and this is what's lacking in Lebanon. First of all, we have what is called a consensual democracy in Lebanon. Each faction, each confession has a veto right to stop normal decisions in development. And this is very crucial. We have to change this. And second, we have to reform our laws in a way to to lesser from the bureaucracy that we have. But most of all, we have to eradicate corruption. We were able to eradicate extremism and terrorism from Lebanon, as the Lebanese society showed that it is an anti-terrorist model, but we were not able to eradicate corruption. And this is a huge change in our society and in our state. And this needs the pressure to continue from the people in the streets, especially the youth. So this is the opportunity that we have, and the political parties and class has to respond, or else it should be made accountable for its acts, because people are really at the top of it.
If I could ask for your response to how you think this might...
See, you asked about Egypt. I'm watching the Egyptian scene, and I see that the Egyptian leadership is doing wonders when it comes to engaging the youth. They are engaging them thoroughly, all the time, everywhere, to the point that I often feel maybe there is a sense of exaggeration in tackling the problem. But I want to say, if I may, that the problems of many of the societies and the governments of the region are, first, as Basil said, the corruption. The corruption is prevalent in many societies. The sense of lack of opportunity, equal opportunity, the rule of law, how to respect the pride of the citizen. All of this, if societies would manage to mend their ways, and that if is a very big if, because corruption often in certain societies is a way of life. But it has to be eradicated. The feelings of nepotism, that someone comes, number one, as a graduate of university in somewhere, and then number 30 gets the opportunity to be appointed as a professor or so. So there has to be a change of behavior in order to take societies from a certain course to a different course.
How do we do it? Any quick thoughts?
Education. Education. You need time, and you need to invest in education. Education is the order of the day.
If I could come in behind the Secretary General, he's exactly right. We cannot put enough emphasis in this dialogue on reform. We cannot put enough emphasis on bringing women into the mainstream. We are past the time where there can be national excuses for not incorporating women in the mainstream. And I get the fact that there will be cultural differences and cultural impediments. But the point is, in virtually every successful developing country, it has been successful because women have been brought into the mainstream. And as long as that isn't a national objective in every one of these countries, then they will never have a hope of achieving a level of development and cultural sophistication in this era of modernity that will make them competitive and create the kinds of social stability that is necessary. This is an absolute imperative. When I watched the peace process unfolding between the United States and the Taliban, my number one concern in the outcome was what will become of the Afghan women. This has to be foremost in our thinking with respect to reform. It isn't just institutional reform. It has to be societal reform. And once again, I get many societies in that region don't want us coming down and trying to have them dictate to them how their society should act. But we know that the alternative is unsupportable. And the alternative is thousands in the streets or thousands radicalized. And we can't stand either of those. This has got to be the moment where we commit across the region to bringing women into the mainstream of society and giving them the opportunities they deserve.
Fighting words there, and as a woman, I welcome that very much indeed, that idea. I just wanted to move slightly on now. We heard in the initial speeches, comments, a lot about the role of multilateralism, the failures of multilateralism within the region. And it occurred to me, does the Middle East need an African Union? Are there ways of bolstering things like the Arab League, GCC, ways to increase that role? And if I could, first of all, put this to you, Secretary General, how do you see this?
It cannot be done because the philosophy of establishing the Arab League in February, March 1945, and the Arab League is the oldest regional organization that preceded even the United Nations or the establishment of the United Nations. The original idea was to bring Arab countries together and to establish or to create an organization that coordinates their positions vis-à-vis international and regional issues. It is not a superstructure on top of the states like the European Union, and it is far less than the African Union. And in order to achieve this, you have to have a collective agreement of 22 countries. They tried it at the beginning. In 1945, the original idea was to create a superstructure. Then some countries declined, and the situation is different. In Europe, for instance, you have countries that are 400 years old. In the Arab world, some countries were established or created only in 1970 and even after. So the feeling of the sense of nationality and of sovereignty is very prominent amongst Arab countries. It won't be done.
It won't be done. Do we agree? Morocco is also a member of the African Union. Do you see ways of synergies, or does there need to be another organization within the Middle East then if nothing can be done with the Arab League?
That is extremely dangerous. Why is it so? The moment you tackle and you play with the Arab League, regional powers will step in because they are dominant right now, and they will try to change the character of the organization to hijack it. Do not play games with the Arab League. Leave it till it is healthy.
If I could ask for your response, please.
Regarding Morocco, I would say that, of course, we will not be able to solve any problem only with one country or two countries facing one to each other. And of course, multilateralism is a necessity, and we are afraid of unilateralism, of course. In Morocco, of course, we belong to African Union, and I would like to point that in African Union, once again, there's something very interesting who's coming, is the African Free Trade Area, which also will change the face of Africa. So here the multilateralism will help the socio-economic development, and Morocco totally agree with this Union African position, of course.
Minister Bassil.
Yes, of course I would not play with the Arab League. We should preserve it. and it has to have a bigger role, but that's not it. I am personally for creating a Mashriq Union that brings together Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and to some extent Egypt. And this won't harm, the presence of the Arab League since we have the GCC. And I can preach a lot about how we can make development in that particular area with so many similarities between its people. But again, that's not it. For me, development in the region is needed through preserving the diversity of that region. And here we have to opt between two things that are totally different. Either we go on moderation or we go on extremism. If we keep on provoking people to fight on a basis of religion and confession in an area that is full of minorities, there is no one majority, people will fight and keep fighting and agglomerating in that sense. That is creating radicalization of the region. However, if we, through education, promote the concepts of tolerance and accepting the other, the culture of living together, like we have it in Lebanon, and the external interferences and the regime that we have that should be changed, and that is impeding this. But if we keep on encouraging people on the culture of living together, that would take us to a real political stability and prosperity. This is a rich region. And all what is happening since the Palestinian crisis since 70 years is playing on the confessional sensitivities, which is dividing the countries from within, dividing the countries in the Arab League and weakening them. And this is creating massive immigration that is hurting also the Mediterranean countries, that is reaching Europe, that is playing with the societal tissue, even in Europe, and that's the harm out of it. I think we should all invest in developing our region, but on the basis of moderation and acceptance of the other.
Thank you. General, and your response?
Well, I agree with the Secretary General. And I paid 2 visits to him when he, in Cairo, as the Islamic State was picking up momentum, and we needed the advice of the Arab League on how to proceed. When I talk to people about organizational initiatives, I talk in terms of form versus function. And your question is an important one. Do we need an African Union for the region? And I think before we talk about the form, let's talk about the function. What is it that we want to have happen in the region? And I think I would not propose to speak for my colleagues here, but habits of dialogue has got to be the minimum standard, where elements of the region can come together and create a habitual commitment to talk rather than fight, or talk rather than to create isolation. And so if we could be agreed that habits of dialogue is the function that we want, then the form can be almost anything. It can be an African Union form. Maybe that's not it. Maybe in the short term, with respect to my Lebanese colleague, it is to find intersecting interests that can motivate an opportunity to come together to have the dialogues necessary for progress and reform. And that can be on education. It can be on innovation. It can be on creation of jobs and economic stability. There are so many ways that the region can have dialogue without having to create a specific form that will then create antibodies that can kill the form without before you take the opportunity to take advantage of the function.
Another provocative question, if I may. You've spoken about habits of dialogue. What are the prospects of restoring diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Very briefly, each of you. General Aaron.
Well, I think not in the short term. Again, here's an opportunity for regional powers and extra-regional powers, or the superpowers. I don't necessarily like that term, but here's an opportunity to create the occasion for dialogue and for the occasion for conversation. I think that opportunity received a terrible blow when the U.S. walked away from the JCPOA. The complaint was, of course, that the agreement did not, in fact, incorporate all Iranian behavior in the region, but that was never the intent of the JCPOA. It was entirely focused on the nuclear program and, to a lesser extent, the ballistic missile program. And we never gave it the opportunity that it needed to both create the common vision of a trajectory into the future and to give us the opportunity for the Iranians to perform within that context. And to the point when we walked away from it, the IAEA had stipulated that the Iranians had been in compliance with the agreement. So it created a whole series of difficulties in the region, the sequence of which has led us now to where we are, which is, I think, a hardening of the positions rather than the potential for a softening of the positions between the kingdom and the regime in Tehran.
Thank you very much. We're running out of towards the end of this session, but I wondered if I could ask you each, in one sentence possibly, as the subject of this session is trying to look towards a positive agenda for the region, what one thing, if you will indulge me in some blue sky thinking, it doesn't have to be possible, but what one thing would you see as being a tangible, important step for change in the region, Secretary General?
Palestine settled the Palestinian question, understand the anger of the Muslim Arab world.
Thank you.
No, I agree, but dialogue is the only solution between Iran and Saudi Arabia among each society. Dialogue can avoid conflicts. Problem is that conflicts in the region is equal to violence and extremism. That's the problem. Dialogue is the real solution.
In many countries today, young people are asking for many questions. So it's time for us to make additions, no division or subtractions. We have no choice.
My sentence will have several commas in it. Mobilize the youth, generate innovation, and to the Secretary General's point, we must move to a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. We must do that. Many commas. If we can do that, that will create an opportunity for dialogue and a habituation of interaction, which I think can bring greater stability to the region.
Just remains for me to say thank you very much for my very distinguished panel. These very things, but before we go, we have the results of our SNAP survey. What you thought were the top risks. Number one, tensions in the Gulf. Number two, mass street protests. Number three, uncertainty of political successions in key states of the regions.
Excellent.
Your thoughts on the top risks. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat as we are going to start next session right now. Thank you. Please take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting right now with next session, so please take your seat. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please, you have to make the central corridor free as our next guest has to come in. So please make the central corridor free. Thank you.
good morning once again. Let's proceed to the next conversation. We have here the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, and with my colleague Jan Lesser, Vice President of the German Marshall Fund, we will try to figure out what the situation seems from a Turkish point of view, and we will have many other topics, as you can figure, to discuss. Good morning, Mr. Minister.
Good morning.
So let's start from the situation in the region, the position of Turkey. How do you assess it?
Well, Mediterranean has been the basin for Mediterranean basin has been the cradle for many civilizations. But today, what we see is that this region has been faced turbulences on waves coming from different angles, from West, from Europe, from East, and also from Africa, from Middle East. There are indeed many challenges and frozen conflicts. Cyprus is one of them. But we have now two major challenges that we have to deal. The situation in Syria, it has many aspects. And countering terrorism is only one of them, but which is a very important one. The humanitarian consequences of the situation, and the situation in Idlib, and political process. And the situation in Libya, getting worse and worse. We all support the efforts of UN and Gassam Salama, that I just met him upstairs when we support the Berlin Summit. But the situation on the ground is getting worse. But there are other challenges as consequences of the situation. Irregular migration is one of them. And from which point of view we see this challenge or problem? From the humanitarian point of view or from the security point of view? I think we should combine both to find a fair solution or to meet the basic needs, at least, of these vulnerable people, including women and children. And the rise of xenophobia, Islamophobia, discrimination, hatred is one of the challenges that we have to face altogether, because our societies, without any discrimination, have been suffering of that. So within this situation, again, effective multilateralism is important. If you list all these challenges that we have been facing, we can easily say that no country or no regional organization can deal these challenges alone. So we need effective multilateralism and sincere cooperation and collaboration between all the actors, not only regional countries. There are many actors from other regions as well, in Syria, now in Libya. Therefore, Turkey has been trying to actually play its constructive role. Turkey is the largest refugee hosting nation or country, 4 million refugees that we have been hosting. And Turkey has 1,800 around, almost, maritime boundaries with Mediterranean. And we have 911 kilometers border sharing with Syria. That's why, naturally, Turkey has been affected most. And it's not only about the number of the refugees. Even only that one has been a huge burden on our shoulder. We have spent more than $40 billion. What we receive from entire international committee is around 3 billion euro. But we only alone ourselves spend more than $40 billion. But terrorism is another consequences of the situation that Turkey has been affected most. We have to deal with this. It's not only about the countering terrorism. On the ground, we have been doing this successfully. We had 3 operations against Daesh and PKK-YPG. But how about the killing of the ideologies of Daesh and the others? And there are women and children left behind. How are we going to rehabilitate them? And we lost many civilians in Turkey due to the terrorist attacks of Daesh and PKK-YPG. We have to counter that. So we have been shouldering a lot of responsibilities and playing important role. And in Syria and in Libya, we believe that only the solution is the political one, not the military one. And that's why we not only do our own job, but we do support the efforts of UN and international community. That's why now we have been able to at least convene the Constitutional Committee meeting in Geneva. Stefan de Mistura is here. He spent a lot of years, many years together with us to reach that point, and his successor is also doing a great job, Pedersen. So this is how we see generally the situation in our region. I just mentioned Cyprus. We spent, since we came to power, sincerely, we spent a lot of efforts to reach a lasting settlement. In 2004, we supported the Annan plan. Unfortunately, Greek Cypriots didn't support it, so it failed. I'm not here to criticize them or to explain why they failed to support, but this is the de facto situation. And in 2017 in Crans-Montana, I was there for 11 days, and everybody recognized that only Turkey was constructive, but it didn't work again. So we should continue our talks to reach a lasting solution. And the situation in Cyprus has other aspects, consequences, like drilling activities around Cyprus. And we have actually many other frozen conflicts around Turkey. Nagorno-Karabakh and occupied territory of Azerbaijan, and Transnistria in Moldova, and two regions of Georgia and Crimea of Ukraine have become frozen conflicts, or conflicts that the solutions have been frozen, and they have been also posing risks from time to time. We need to find solutions to those problems as well.
Thanks for the vision, Ian. I think we can start the conversation here.
Monica, thank you very much. Mr. Minister, good morning. I was wondering if I could ask you to follow up about Syria. Turkey is now very heavily engaged on the ground in Syria. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your vision of the end game there. I mean, what is Turkey's exit strategy?
Right. If we can convince the regime in Damascus, maybe some of its supporters as well, that the best solution, or the viable solution, is the political solution, I think we can resolve the problem. And the first round of the Constitution, why I say this? First round of the Constitutional Committee meeting went better than expectations. But regime blocked, unfortunately, the second round of the talks with their unacceptable preconditions. And here we see that they don't believe in the political solution. And when you look at the Idlib, they have been increasing their aggression, and they continued their bombardments indiscriminately. So many civilians, thousands of civilians have been killed, and already tens of thousands of people have been displaced. Do they care about that? No, as they didn't care in Aleppo, in Iskuta, Homs, or Dara, or elsewhere. So only the solution is the political solution. But it is not that simple. Meanwhile, the territorial integrity of the country is so important. And YPG-PKK still has a separatist agenda, unfortunately supported by some coalition members. And now with our operation, after our operation, that plan has been killed, but we should be still vigilant. So countering terrorism, if we can clean the countries, including Iraq, from all sort of terrorist organizations with all manifestations, we can help the territorial integrity or support the territorial integrity of the country. And another aspect, I said, in humanitarian aspects of, there are many refugees in our countries, not only in Turkey, but in other neighboring countries, Iraq, Lebanon, and also Jordan. Obviously, they want to go back. How do I know that? We do meet them. And so far, 370,000 Syrian refugees from Turkey went back to Jarablus El-Bab region, where we cleaned from Daesh, and Afrin region voluntarily, because they feel safe there. already 65% of the IDPs went back to our operation areas. They want to go back. So we need to also work together for voluntary, safe, and dignified returns. And OCHA and UNHCR should be our main partner as main partners of Turkey. And we need to provide at least their basic needs as we agreed with other countries. Now, together with Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon, we are planning to co-host a conference on the return of the Syrians. So this is a very complicated situation. The situation on the ground is also very complicated. And what we see also now, the regime cannot provide any assistance, even the basic needs of the people where they control, living where they control. It's also a big problem. So we need to reach a political settlement, not as soon as possible, but immediately. And this is the worst disaster that the world has been facing after the World War II.
Mr. Minister, if I can follow up on Syria, because just a few days ago during an interview, President Assad said that this is not going to be settled until you continue to be the main protector of Nusra in Idlib territory, and this is his accusation. And on the second point, you always speak about protecting integrity of territory in Syria, but this is something that you decided, or did Damascus ask you to protect their territory? Because normally when a state wants the protection of his own land, they ask for it. Instead, something different is happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these questions. First of all, we can never support any terrorist organization, neither in Turkey nor other side of the Turkey. In the past, Turkey was, accused for supporting Daesh as well. One day, John Kerry told me that Turkey is buying oil from Daesh. I said, this is unacceptable. You have to provide evidence. And then at the second meeting, I reminded him he couldn't. Third meeting, no. At the fourth meeting that I saw him in New York, I insisted. Then he sent me, CIA sent me documents of some maps. And then I asked my intelligence and the security officials in Turkey to find out what it is. Actually, it was the asphalt plantation of the city Kilis, where more refugees, Syrian refugees, are living than the local people. Then CIA had to apologize officially in writing. So those terrorist organizations are first and foremost my enemy. And we lost more than 300 civilians in Turkey. I don't mean the troops, the soldiers that have been martyred in our fight against Daesh. There is no difference between Daesh and al-Nusra. There is no difference between al-Fatah and also PKK, YPG for us. And we have been never in a selective approach in our fight against terrorism. So this claim of the regime is baseless. And who sent these al-Nusra elements to Idlib region? Who did it? Stefan knows better than I do. The regime and its supporters let al-Nusra terrorists with their weapons to go to Idlib from Aleppo first. While we were evacuating the civilians, they just supported the leave of these terrorists. Stefan is approving this. And also from East Ghouta, and also Homs. Forget about these neighboring cities. They brought al-Nusra terrorists by buses all the way from Dara to Idlib region. I didn't bring them there. What was the reason behind that? At the end, they were going to actually use the presence of these terrorists as an excuse to attack Idlib. And this is exactly what they are doing. I'm against all sorts of terrorist organizations on the ground, and al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and Daesh are listed as terrorist organizations in Turkey. Secondly, we are committed to territorial integrity of Syria more than anybody else. And our operations have been targeting only terrorists. Nobody was criticizing Turkey like Turkey is occupying, so-called occupying Syria, when I started my operation against Daesh, everybody was very happy that I'm still there. Also in Afrin, it was against YPG, PKK. Nobody reacted that much. Why our coalition member and some countries like France overreacted this time? Because they were aiming to create a terror statelet. And they were aiming to support the separatist agenda of this terrorist organization, nothing to hide. That's why they have been very much disappointed. And what should I do now? If I leave this area, if I withdraw immediately, and I am sure who fulfill the vacuums first? Terrorist organizations, Daesh or YPG, PKK. If I leave it to regime without a political settlement, I am not sure that the regime will not get along with this terrorist organization for its own interests. And more importantly, what is the reason now behind that refugees in our neighboring countries don't want to go? Because they have a fear of the regime. So if regime takes over, no refugees will go back voluntarily and safely to Syria. But this is the main principle that we all agree that it has to be voluntary, safe, and dignified return. So these areas that we have been forcing right now, the territories of Syria, and we are committed that. And when there is a political settlement, of course, we can easily hand over, and when they have established their security forces there, and we can easily hand over these areas to the Syrian people, Syrian state.
Mr. Minister, I wonder if I could take you in a slightly different direction now, although it's related in a way, and talk a little bit about Turkey's security relationship with the West and with NATO in particular, and with the United States in particular. I think we'd agree that these have been pretty troubled times. Never an easy relationship to manage, but particularly difficult in recent years.
I like challenge.
Yeah. I mean, one of the challenges at the heart of this, has been this S-400 dispute. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because that's obviously a commercial and a technical choice for Turkey, but it's a political choice, and it's seen that way. Is it really worth it?
Is it? Do you believe that it is a political choice of Turkey?
It's seen that way in Washington.
Well, and I ask your personal opinion.
I think it is a political choice. All those kinds of purchases at that level are political choices. I think you are mistaken.
Let me explain why. Do Turkey needs air defense systems? Is Turkey desperate right now? Yeah, you agree. Thank you very much. Do we have our own? No. Thank God we have been producing more than 70% of Turkey's need right now in Turkey, and we will continue to that end. But we are still not self-sufficient country in defense industry, not yet. Okay? And you also admit that Turkey needs air defense systems. Did we try to buy from our allies? Yes, for the last 10 years, we wanted to buy Patriots from the United States. We wanted to buy SAMP-T from France and Italy, but we couldn't get them. And NATO, since we don't have any air defense system, NATO asked our allies to deploy their batteries to the borders in Turkey. Who did that? Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States, and Italy and Spain. And in 2013, US, Netherlands, and Germany withdrew their batteries from my border when I needed them most. And this year, Italy decided to withdraw their SAMP-T battery. I'm not here to criticize Italy. I have to thank Italy only for the prolongation of the deployment until today. Now we have only one Spanish Patriot battery. Obviously, we need more. And I'm very grateful to our Spanish NATO ally and good friend. So this, okay. I need it. And I wanted to buy from our allies. They didn't want to provide that. I wanted to purchase them from our allies. This is our priority. And even today, I am ready to purchase Patriots. But is United States giving any guarantee that they will get consent or okay from the Congress? No. So what am I going to do? It is purely for technical reason that I had to buy air defense systems from somewhere else, because I couldn't get it from my allies. And in the future, I need more of them until I produce in Turkey. And if I cannot get Patriots or Samtis from our allies, I will have to continue purchasing from other sources. Say it can be S-400, it can be others. So actually, President Trump perfectly understands this. But his administration and Pentagon didn't want to understand this. But what we agreed in Washington, D.C., and also in London 2 days ago during the NATO leaders meeting, that we should continue to talk on this issue. So it is not a political reason. We are NATO ally, and yes, Russia is our neighboring country. We buy gas from Russia, and our trade volume has been increasing. We disagree with Russia on Crimea, territorial integrity of Georgia, and even on Syria. We disagree in some areas. Again, Stefan knows this better than I do. But at the end, Russia is our immediate neighbor. I have to also cooperate with Russia, and our cooperation with Russia in Astana, in Sochi, has been bearing fruits. If Geneva is alive today, it is thanks to our products or outcomes of this Astana and Sochi talk. But I am the NATO ally, and we have been contributing to NATO activities more than most of the other NATO allies. So this is not a political choice, my friend. Are you convinced?
Well, sort of.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I know Monica has
Sort
something to
of is
If you'll
better
allow
than
me,
no.
if you'll
Better
allow
than
me
no.
just one follow. If you know, obviously there are a whole list of things. You mentioned some of them that are kind of on the minds of the West and Turkey at the moment that's made it difficult, lack of trust. But if there's one thing from your side that you could,
It's
that you could,
mutual. I have
that's
to
mutual,
reciprocal.
If
Yes,
there's
sir.
one thing you would think of that would help, that we could do between us to help this situation, say with the United States, what would it be? What's the one thing?
Say it again.
What's the one top thing, in your view, that we could fix between the United States and Turkey that would help?
Well, United States concern is our S-400 procurement. Maybe it is important sensitive, but we made proposal to meet their concerns. What is the proposal? Let's establish a joint working group of experts of NATO, Turkey, and the United States, and NATO should chair this to make the assessment and to find out whether their concerns are legitimate or not. This is the actually very positive, flexible approach. And what is my concern? What is my problem? First, the United States has been supporting a terrorist organization that has been attacking me. Right? More than 30,000 trucks load weapons that U.S. provided. So which one is more sensitive for any country or any nation? All right? And secondly, the perpetrator of the attempted coup in Turkey, the leader of this terrorist organization, FETÖ, has been living in the United States. No measures have been taken. Not only the leader of this terrorist organization, but other key figures fled to death. So which concern is more legitimate? Which problem is actually create more problem to each other? This is very simple. We try to create a safe zone with the United States in Syria upon the proposal of Trump. But what we saw on the ground was only delaying tactic of the United States. While they were working with us on the ground, pretend that they were working, at the 3 kilometers away, actually, they were supporting this YPG PKK terrorists, not only providing the weapons, but also through training programs.
Mr. Minister, I would like to ask you so many questions, but time
Go
is
ahead.
really running away.
Well,
so
you
I had
ask
something
long
about
and difficult questions.
Oh,
I have to respond.
No, you're kidding. So, so let's do like this. We leave aside
Let's
for a
proceed
second.
the easy and simple ones.
Okay. So the easy and simple one: relations with the EU and Italy, and also the EU public opinion. Because I'm one of those people that always said that the dialogue with Turkey has to be kept open in some ways. But you should find a way also to, gain public opinion. And maybe the strategy is not the one of threatening Europe every single time with the refugee bomb, because last time that there has been this disagreement on Syria, your president was the one who said, now, if you continue with this disagreement, we will open the borders. So do you think that this kind of tactic can help our relation?
Well, when anybody criticizes my President Erdogan and Turkey, my nation, when anybody, it's perfectly okay. But when there is a response coming from Turkey, nobody likes it. Well, why Erdogan said that? Well, I have been hosting more than 4 million refugees, and 3.6 million of them are from Syria, for last 7 years. I just mentioned that. And why? Because this is a burden. And, a common challenge in Europe, and we are part of this continent. We are not only a member of the European Union, okay? Besides that, we are a member of OSCE and the Council of Europe and this and that. So, we haven't received enough support, okay? But still, we have been fully implementing this migration deal that we reached with EU in March 2016. But when Erdogan proposed that we should work together for voluntary and safe return, many European countries said, no, I don't want to support this because you are doing the demographic engineering. If people are able to go back to their homes, is it demographic engineering? YPG has did democratic engineering. If you don't believe me, you can ask the Christian minorities in Syria, Arameans and the others. Go and ask. You can ask the Syrian Kurds living in Turkey. 350,000 Syrian Kurds living in my country still. Why they couldn't go back? Not only those, but the ones in also northern Iraq, 250,000 around. Why they have not been able to go back? Because YPG didn't allow them to go back, because YPG hates other Kurds, the opposition Kurds. So what I'm trying to say, okay, we want to return, and Europe said no. And President had the right to say, okay, if you don't want help us to, help us and the refugees who are returning, then it is enough is enough. It has been ordered, and you take them, and you take care of them in your countries. Fair enough. It's not a threatening. Fair enough. Because European Union and EU countries, particularly Madam Merkel, knows that the cost of one refugee in Syria or in Turkey 10 times less than the cost of the refugees living in Germany and Europe. So it's mutually beneficial for everybody. Why they don't want to support? Because of this operation against YPG, PKK, terrorist organization. Is it my mistake? No. US and France and some coalition members made the biggest mistake to engage or to collaborate with another terrorist organization in our fight against Daesh. But only Turkey puts its troops in harm's way. And Turkey alone eliminated more than 4,600 Daesh terrorists. Forget about this, more than 7,000 foreign terrorist fighters we captured and deported. So when our allies make mistake, it is legitimate, but when we criticize that, Turkey is threatening. I don't want to say double standard or hypocrisy. I used this word many times before, but this is the situation.
Mr. Minister, I'm conscious of our time, of your time. Thank you very much for this very open, very frank conversation. It was very good to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we start next session right now. Please, in particular, the central corridor, please make it free. Keep it free. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. We are starting next session right now. In particular, please leave the central corridor free. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat and leave the central corridor free. Thank you.
Okay. Hello and welcome to this dialogue, Mediterranean dialogue, and this dialogue session with Adel bin Ahmed Al Jubeir, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. Welcome, sir. And with me, Matthew Karnichnik, who is the Chief Europe Editor of Politico. We'll have half an hour to try to get as many answers as possible from you. And I want to begin with a question about the region. Take two examples. In Lebanon and in Iraq, we saw in recent weeks protest movements pushing out prime ministers. They were against corruption, but they were to a certain extent also against Iran and its allies. We've also seen massive protests in Iran that were crushed. What is happening?
I believe the region is saying enough is enough to the Iranians. I believe that what we're seeing in Iran is a result of 40 years of neglect. Since the Khomeini revolution in 1979, the Iranian government has tried to export terrorism, has tried to build a nuclear weapon, has interfered in the affairs of other countries. It has done everything that involves death and destruction, but it has not taken care of its people. And the Iranian people are saying enough is enough, and they're reacting to it. I believe this with regards to Iraq, what we saw last year is demonstrations in Basra against Iran. What we're seeing today is demonstrations across all the Shia areas in Iraq against Iran. And the Iraqi Shia are saying we are Arabs, we don't want Iran interfering in our affairs, and we've had enough of it. In Lebanon, we see for the first time demonstrations by the Shia against Hezbollah in the south. And this is also saying enough is enough. We want our country back, and we want to be a normal country, and we are an Arab country.
So you think that there's really a sea change happening, that Iran is on the back foot in the region after you're denouncing Iran being on the offense?
Well, the Iranians have squandered their resources since 1979, like I said, promoting death and destruction. They have assassinated diplomats, blown up embassies. They have planted terrorism cells. They have spent tens of billions of dollars trying to build a nuclear weapon, which they don't need. They have supported terrorist groups. They have a ballistic missile program to terrorize the region. And like I said, at a certain point, you can't afford it. And at a certain point, people will say enough is enough. And I hope that this is the reaction of the region and of the Iranian people to the aggressive policies of the Iranian regime.
But do you think that we will see the Iranian people succeed this time in rising up? Because we've seen this kind of backlash before in 2009 at other stages over the past 40 years. What makes this different, or is it really different?
I hope so, but I can't assess, because the Iranian regime is the most brutal regime in the world. We saw what they did in 2009. They have no compulsion about killing their people in order to preserve the regime, and I would expect that they will continue to do so. The key is to make sure that Iran remains isolated. The key is to make sure that Iran is under sanctions. The key is to make sure that we deny Iran the resources with which to perpetuate its policies of death and destruction.
Would you say, in a way, that the maximum, quote-unquote, pressure policy applied by the Trump administration, getting out of the nuclear deal, is working despite all the criticism it's getting, especially here in Europe?
Yes. Iran is denied income. Inflation is skyrocketing. Iran's currency is plummeting. And so Iran is feeling the pressure. Iran is losing, is not able to sell its oil. We support the maximum sanctions campaign. We support the withdrawal from the JCPOA. We believe the JCPOA has flaws in it. The first flaw is the sunset provision that lifts the restriction on how much enriched uranium Iran can have after 12 years after the signing of the agreement. We believe that the inspections can be more broad and more intrusive than they currently are. And we also believe that there are two main areas that Iran needs to be held accountable for. One is its support for terrorism and interference in the affairs of other countries. And the second area is its ballistic missile program, which is in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. So if we want to deal with the challenge of Iran, we need to deal with the nuclear program, the missile program, and their support for terrorism and interference in the affairs of other countries.
Just coming back to the JCPOA, as you know, it remains very popular in Europe. The Europeans are still trying to preserve what they can of it. You seem to be saying, well, it would be a good thing if the maximum pressure campaign causes the Iranian regime to collapse, which seems to be something that a lot of Europeans are actually worried about because of the disruption that that could create. And they have, obviously, what happened in Iraq very fresh in their minds. Why are you not worried, or are you worried about that kind of full-blown collapse of Iran and what that could lead to in the broader region?
I don't believe anyone is talking about regime change. What people are talking about is behavior modification. Iran has the principle of exporting the revolution enshrined in its constitution. Iran does not believe in the sovereignty of nations. It believes that every Shia belongs to it. That's like saying Italy claims every Catholic. Do you think Germany and France and Spain would accept this? Of course not. Iran does not believe in the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. It supports terrorism. All of this has to change if Iran wants to be treated as a normal country. And so the thinking behind the maximum pressure campaign is to compel the Iranian government to come to the negotiating table and negotiate a better JCPOA, and negotiate on ballistic missiles, and negotiate on its interference in the affairs of other countries. So the ball is really in Iran's court.
But isn't what we're seeing right now the opposite of that, where you have even, the so-called moderates in Iran coming together with the hardliners, that there's very little difference now within the different interest groups in Iran, that they're all sort of rallying around one another?
I see pressure building up in Iran. I see Iran being more isolated. I think that needs to continue. We have always said that appeasement does not work. Trying to build a parallel money transfer system to SWIFT, it will not work. Trying to provide loans to Iran will not work. That's called appeasement. The appeasement did not work with Hitler in World War II. It will not work with Iran today. The world has to be very firm in what it expects of Iran, and the world has to be very firm in holding Iran accountable. Nobody wants war, but the Iranians cannot be allowed to get away with murder. That has got to stop.
Just one last question on that. Why do you think that the Europeans refuse to accept these arguments? Because we've been going around and around with these arguments for a few years now. Obviously, in the American view, and I think in your view, the JCPOA is dead. The Europeans, the P3, they refuse to accept that reality. Why do you think that is?
I think you should ask them that question. We have explained to them our logic. We continue to discuss this issue with our allies in Europe. There is no doubt that all of the European countries do not want Iran to ever have a nuclear weapon. There's no doubt about that. The question is, how do you stop them? There's no doubt that all the European countries want Iran to stop its ballistic missile program. No doubt. The question is, how do you bring it about? There's no doubt that all the European countries want Iran to stop interfering in the affairs of other countries and support terrorism. No doubt. The question is, how do you do it? And so, name one approach other than maximum sanctions that will bring Iran to the table. Because the policies of the past, from 1979 until now, have not worked. So we need a different approach, and this is the approach that's available.
I want to get to one of the bone of contentions with Iran. It might be an indirect one, Yemen. Clearly, the war is going nowhere, but it seems there might be some interesting developments. We understand your government has opened a channel with the Houthi rebels through Oman. We've seen prisoners being released. We've seen the fighting recede up to a certain point, of course. And it seems you've changed tack on Yemen. You realize the war is not going to be won. Peace needs to be found. Is this what's happening?
We have always maintained that the only solution to Yemen is a political solution. We did not start this war. The Houthis started this war by staging a coup. We interfered as part of a coalition of Arab countries 9 months after the war in Yemen started to support the legitimate government. We took the position that the solution is a Yemeni solution, and we took the position that all Yemenis, including the Houthis, have a role to play in Yemen's future. The war continued. Eventually, the legitimate government was able to reclaim a lot of the territory that the Houthis has occupied, but they still occupy major metropolitan areas. We support the efforts of Martin Griffith to try to bring about peace in Yemen. We had a situation where there was a conflict between the Southern Transitional Council and the legitimate government, and we were able to very quickly move in and work out peace between them. There will be a new government in Yemen that will be formed, that is being formed as we speak. There have been confidence-building measures that Martin Griffith has been able to work out that involve opening of the Sana'a airport gradually, that involved more ships going into Hodeidah, and that most recently involved the transfer of prisoners. So these are good steps that one can build on. There have been a significant reduction, if not a complete halt, to the missile attacks by the Houthis against Saudi Arabia. There have been a substantial drop in the air operations by the coalition. So I think where there is goodwill, there is the ability to move towards a settlement. At the end of the day, we have always said that Yemen is our neighbor, and the Yemeni people have familial ties and tribal ties with Saudi Arabia. The Houthis themselves, their lands border our territory. And so we want to have the best relations with all Yemenis, including the Houthis. We want an end to this war so we can move towards reconstruction and development.
Right, but all those confidence-building measures do not come out of the blue. They come from those talks, however direct they are, with the Houthis. And that's a big change, because until now it was the Houthis were Iran's proxies. There's no reason why we should talk to them because of what you just said before.
Yeah, I'm hoping that what we say is that Iran's involvement in Yemen is a destructive involvement. It's not a positive involvement. Over a period of 2,000 years, Iran has not laid one brick to build a hospital, a road, or a school. Saudi Arabia has been Yemen's largest contributor of developmental assistance, and we expect to continue to be that, because Yemen is critically important to us. And when Yemen is healthy, it's good for us. When Yemen ails, we are affected. We have a large Yemeni population living in Saudi Arabia. We have had historically very strong ties with all Yemeni groups, and we have family ties and tribal ties between our two countries.
So you're optimistic those talks will bear fruit?
Inshallah, yes.
I'd like to come to your relationship, or Saudi Arabia's relationship, with the United States. As you know, there's been a lot of skepticism about Saudi Arabia within the Democratic Party, in particular, not only amongst the Democrats, since the Khashoggi killing, which you, of course, say was a rogue operation. That said, many in the U.S. establishment don't accept that, still don't accept that. Are you worried, especially if you look at the way President Trump abandoned the Kurds in Syria, are you worried about the alliance with the United States, especially if the Democrats win the presidency next year?
Not at all. Our relationship with the U.S. is bipartisan. Our relationship with the U.S. politically began with a Democratic president when FDR met the late King Abdulaziz at the Great Bitter Lake on the USS Quincy on Valentine's Day in 1945. The relationship has grown every decade. It's broadened, it's deepened, whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president. And the reason that's the case is because the two countries have a very critically important relationship. Saudi Arabia has the largest oil reserves. The US doesn't need oil, but oil is fungible. You have a shortage of crude oil in one part of the world, everybody on the planet suffers. Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam and custodian of the two holy mosques. Saudi Arabia's influence extends to 1.6 billion Muslims. That's critically important to the US. Saudi Arabia sits at the crossroads of 3 continents. Saudi Arabia sits alongside 3 of the world's most critical passageways, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab al-Mandab, and the Suez Canal. Saudi Arabia is one of the largest financial players in the world. Saudi Arabia is one of the largest energy players in the world. Saudi Arabia and the US are working together to try to stabilize Lebanon, working together to stabilize Iraq, working together to stabilize Afghanistan, working together to calm tensions between India and Pakistan, working together to fight piracy in the Red Sea, working together to support Sudan, to support Egypt, working together in order to defeat Boko Haram in the G5 Sahel countries. So this is a really important relationship. We have huge investments, we have huge trade, we have a huge population of Americans living in Saudi Arabia and visiting Saudi Arabia, and vice versa. So the relationship is not going anywhere. Several years ago, there was talk about a pivot to Asia. What happened? We have more American forces in the Gulf today than we did when people talked about a pivot to Asia. The US role in the Middle East, we don't see it as receding. Quite the contrary. America is a superpower. It has interests. It will pursue those interests. What happened in Iraq was not an abandonment of the Kurds, it was restructuring of American forces. People talk about the US reducing its forces in the region because they pulled out 150 out of northern Syria, but they're sending thousands to Saudi Arabia as we speak. So I don't see this concept of America as receding, quite the contrary. And I don't see anything but a strengthening of the relationship.
You mentioned the troops that President Trump is sending to Saudi Arabia now. Given the history of American troops there, and if you remember, I'm sure you do, the presence of American troops in Saudi Arabia was the inspiration for Osama bin Laden originally. Do you think it's really advisable for the U.S. to continue to engage, especially in your country, in such an aggressive way?
Yes. America is our ally, and the American presence in Saudi Arabia helps the security of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi public is fully aware of this. The Saudi public knows that our two countries are partners and that our two countries have stood shoulder to shoulder in fighting terrorism and extremism, and our two countries will stand shoulder to shoulder in pushing back against Iran's nefarious activities.
And are you going to pay for those troops, as President Trump has suggested?
Saudi Arabia has always carried its weight. From the day our relationship with the US began, we are not a burden on anyone.
I'll take that as a yes.
I just said we are not a burden on anyone. We and the US are allies, and we have always paid our fair share.
I want to get to another regional issue, Qatar. Obviously, there's been a big dispute with Qatar for the past 2.5 years between you and several of your allies in the region. Next week, there's going to be a summit of the Gulf Cooperation Council in Riyadh. The Saudi king officially invited the Emir of Qatar. He hasn't gone to Saudi Arabia for such summits since the dispute. So will he go? And there have also been reports that Qatar's foreign minister went to Saudi Arabia, probably to discuss. And I should add, and maybe last but not least, there was a football tournament in Qatar where Saudi Arabia participated, and Qatar was kind enough to lose yesterday the semifinal against Saudi Arabia.
I think we're very happy with the win of our soccer team, and I think they won because they
football diplomacy can work.
Because they performed very well. We have the Emir of Qatar was invited to the GCC summit, as he was invited to the GCC Arab and Islamic summits in June of this year. He was invited last year to the GCC summit, and he was invited to the Arab League summit that was held in the Eastern Province. So whether he attends or not is really something that you should address to our Qatari colleagues. The Qataris know what needs to be done. They know where the problem lies, and they need to take the steps necessary in order to overcome those problems. We have always said that we have a common history with Qatar and we have a common destiny, but there are policies that have to change, and we hope they will change.
Have they started changing, and are there reports that the foreign minister went to Saudi Arabia to discuss those 13 demands? True.
We have seen some changes in the laws with regards to terror financing by Qatar, but there needs to be more steps taken, and I believe they understand what those steps are.
And you believe it's on the right path, just like Yemen, that this could be a point of tension that might disappear in the near future?
I'm always an optimist, but it really is up to the Qataris to take the steps that need to be taken.
Well, you could show more flexibility maybe on some of those demands.
Well, it's up to them to take the steps necessary when they know what they are.
I'd like to come to another flashpoint, which is the Israeli-Palestinian situation. There was some optimism in some quarters of Washington about Trump's plan for a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It hasn't really gone anywhere so far. How do you view this plan, which was put together by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner?
Well, it hasn't been presented yet. Our position has been and remains that a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has to be based on a two-state settlement, based on the Arab League Arab Peace Initiative and based on the relevant Security Council resolutions, with the ultimate outcome being a Palestinian state on 67 borders with minor and mutually agreed to adjustments, with East Jerusalem as its capital. We have always said that once this happens, then there will be peace between not only Israel and the Arab world, but Israel and the Islamic world. The Arab Peace Initiative that was put on the table in 2002 was reiterated every year at every Arab summit. In 2005, at a December Islamic summit, the OIC countries adopted the peace initiative. So now you're looking at the peace with 57 countries. But we need to get this going, and annexing territory, continuing the settlements, that is not conducive to this. And so our view is the solution and the settlement is clear. We need the political will in order to get there.
But everything you describe is being supported by the Trump administration. So by that logic, we would be moving further away from the two-state solution.
We've made that clear to our friends that unilateral actions are not acceptable and are not conducive to promoting peace.
But if I may, the Palestinians were very optimistic at the outset. They had meetings with President Trump. President Abbas came out. He was really, he thought this would happen. And clearly, they've been totally disappointed. When you ask them, they say, we don't believe there is actually a plan. We don't believe it will ever be presented. And those who pretend to continue to believe it are just lying. So the Palestinians have lost any hope. Why are you still hopeful Trump or his administration will come up with this so-called deal of the century?
You have to always be optimistic, because otherwise you can't solve problems. And you have to keep trying until you get to a solution that is acceptable to all parties. And so we can't raise our hands and give up. That's not what we do. If you want to be a diplomat, you have to be an optimist. Otherwise, you should be a commentator. With all due respect to commentators, but...
Right. But I mean, are you conveying those concerns that little by little the Trump administration is killing the two-state solution? From your viewpoint?
From our viewpoint,
that's what diplomats do.
We've from day one, we have outlined what we thought would be the fair settlement. We have provided our advice with regards to what we thought the approach should be. We have offered to work with the US and the international community to try to encourage the two parties to move towards such a solution, but we can't force our views on the other side.
There's always a lot of rumors about your contacts with the Israeli government behind the scenes. Are you cooperating with them or discussing with them in any way about what we've just discussed here, the two-state solution?
We have no ties with the Israelis, and so we don't communicate with them. There are certain challenges where both countries see eye to eye with regards to threats from Iran and what Iran is doing in the region, but we have no relationship with the Israelis. And our point is, until there is a peace, normalization cannot happen.
Right. Just because we're nearing the end, obviously, as Matthew pointed out, after Jamal Khashoggi murder, Saudi Arabia has been incurring a lot of criticism about its human rights record, and even their human rights groups are saying that Saudi Arabia is still going after dissenters, not only inside Saudi Arabia, but outside of Saudi Arabia. And therefore, it was actually not a rogue operation, but the modus operandi of the Saudi regime. What's your response?
Our response is that this was a huge mistake that was not authorized. The Saudi government has never murdered any of its citizens. There was an investigation. We have more than 20 people investigated. 11 are currently facing trial, and 5 of them are facing potentially the death sentence. The government has taken steps to put in place mechanisms in our intelligence services to prevent something like this from happening again. So we investigated, we're holding people accountable, and we're putting in place mechanisms to stop it from happening again. When Abu Ghraib happened, did President Bush give the order? Did Secretary Rumsfeld give the order? No. Mistake happened, unauthorized investigation, hold people accountable, put in place procedures to prevent it from happening again. When Oliver North was embarked on Iran-Contra, he thought that President Reagan wanted this. And President Reagan didn't. What did the US do? It investigated, held people accountable, put in place procedures to prevent it from happening again. And this is what we're doing in Saudi Arabia. And I tell people, before you begin and charge Saudi Arabia with something, wait until the process plays out and then judge us, not beforehand. Isn't the principle innocent until proven guilty? In this case, it was flipped upside down. With regards to human rights in Saudi Arabia, we're making great progress. We are liberating women and liberating youth. Bans that existed in the past no longer exist. Women can get a passport and travel freely without anyone's permission. Women get the same pay for the same job. In the foreign ministry, for example, 5 years ago, the incoming class of diplomats was 10% women. Last year, the incoming class was 50% women. So we're making strides, and we're moving, and we're looking at our laws, and we're looking at our legal system, and we're looking at our educational system. Our objective under Vision 2030 is to make Saudi Arabia a dynamic place, an innovative place, a society based on technology, moderation, openness, and inclusivity. And this is what we're working towards.
Okay, I believe we have to end it here. We're told that we have 30 minutes and no more. Thank you very much, Minister Al-Jubeir. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we start next session, and please leave the central corridor free. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. We are going to start next session. Please leave the central corridor free. Central corridor free, thank you.
I'm very happy, everyone, to be joining Mark Perlman to have this discussion with the Foreign Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Sami Shukri, who's had a very long diplomatic and government career in Egypt. You've served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2014, and even had a few stints in the United States as ambassador to Washington and also as Egypt's representative to the United Nations. So I wanted to start this discussion by pointing out that Egypt is the largest country in the Arab world and, of course, has an ancient civilization that we all study. Egypt has been a trailblazer historically in the region and a very important power broker. regimes have come and gone very quickly in the last decade, and there's been so much change in the region. I thought we could ask you, first off, where you see Egypt's strengths at the moment, its particular role in the region against the backdrop of so many diverse challenges.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be participating in this session, the 5th session of the Med Dialogue. And certainly it is events as this one which brings together representatives from across the region and beyond to deliberate and to consider the various aspects of what is currently happening and how we can do it better. And there's always room for improvement. I think that currently, and I don't want to repeat what was said previously about conditions in the regions and the various challenges that exist. I think that previous panelists have covered that sufficiently, but maybe more to concentrate on Egypt's role in the region. And definitely in terms of its size, in terms of its historical influence, and its the divergence of its social composition, it still does hold a place of prominence and influence in the region and its associations, which go beyond the Mediterranean, being an integral part of the Arab world, of the African continent, of the non-aligned, of the Islamic cooperation. So we have various hats to wear, and I think the premise is that in all of these associations, what we are striving for is stability, security, and fulfilling the aspirations of our neighboring peoples. I think that over the last 5 years, Egypt has demonstrated a resilience to have been able to weather the difficult years subsequent to 2011, to regain a system of governance built upon democratic principles and to create the stability that I believe will be fundamental to expand that stability into the region and provide an environment of greater security.
I want to get to some of the specific cases in your neighborhood. Clearly, one big problem for the region, for Egypt, has been Libya. We're seeing essentially what we can only define as a quagmire. We have two opposite camps. They pretend to negotiate in France and Italy, maybe soon in Germany, but they actually fight much more, and they have proxies. Egypt has been accused of siding with Marshal Haftar, Turkey and Qatar with the government in Tripoli. Do you see any hope on the horizon in Libya, or do you think war will continue?
Well, fundamentally, the situation in Libya can only be resolved by the Libyans themselves and their ability to overcome the divisions that exist. And those divisions aren't simple. They are complex because they are regional, they are political, they are hierarchical, they are ideological, and thereby there is a diversity of conflicting and competing elements, including the fact that Libya is not the typical failed state which is underdeveloped, underdeprived, without any resources and wealth. On the contrary, we have the opposite, and thereby there is an ever-growing degree of a desire to manipulate those resources and to exclusively take benefit of them, whether internally or through those external spheres of interest. But I think there is currently a process in Berlin that poses a degree of hope because we sense that there is more coalescence around the fact that to solve the Libyan problem, we have to find a comprehensive solution, one that deals with all of the various aspects of bringing back the political process to a full implementation of the Sukhairat agreement, the dealing with the militias and their influence and manipulation of the Libyan government, the fair distribution of the wealth, building the institutions of governance, and having them to be truly representative, bringing back the issue of legislative oversight, and of course unification of the army as the only competent authority to secure the stability and the sovereignty of the state. There's a terrorist threat that is exceedingly expanding, and that threatens not only Libya but also the neighboring states and beyond in the Sahel states. So I think it is incumbent that if the talks in Berlin with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and the main regional interested parties, I believe that that comprehensive solution, if endorsed by the international community, can become a basis for the Libyan people, with the help of Dr. Ghassan Salama as the UN envoy, to bring back the political process to the appropriate track, and to bring about a consensus within the Libyans themselves to move ahead towards an electoral process that can create the legitimacy for a government that can fulfill the aspirations of the Libyan people.
Just as a quick follow-up, last time there was a process put in place by Mr. Salame. There was supposed to be a meeting of all the Libyans, and Marshal Haftar decided to attack Tripoli. How can you negotiate with someone who thinks you can win militarily?
Well, you have to take into perspective that Dr. Salama, who I respect quite highly and who has been undertaking efforts all along to bring about that consensus, unfortunately, was also burdened by not having been able to convene that national conference. And there had, from the beginning and from the outset, been those who had counseled him of the difficulties. And during that extended period, there were sufficient points of agitation that created the movement of the army in opposition to militias, some of them very fundamental, some of them associated to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and deemed it important to be able to confront those elements. So you cannot really pinpoint a certain point of time or action and revolve around it all the subsequent developments. But I think we have to take the whole situation in its totality and evaluate it objectively.
Minister Shukri, what about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? You recently expressed your concerns about the U.S. administration's statement about settlements and how that would set back the process indefinitely. Where do things stand, to your mind?
Well, Egypt's position as relates to settlement has always been consistent. We have condemned the expansion of settlements, considered them a violation of international law and legitimacy, and we have never diverted from that position, along with the Arab League and our brethren Arab states, and I think the overall majority of the international community. But we recognize as well the central role of the Palestinian issue to the stability and security of the region, and that the Palestinian people are certainly worthy of statehood as other peoples of the region. And I think it is those rights are overdue in being fulfilled, and it will continue to fester and create pressures on all of the region and the ability to open doors of cooperation and coexistence that would benefit all the peoples of the region if the Palestinian-Israeli question is not resolved, if the two-state solution is not put in place and implemented. We strive to encourage all sides to have the political will and determination to undertake the difficult decisions and make peace. But at the same time, we do not exert any pressure or try to coerce them to do so. This
What
is
are
a
you
matter.
doing concretely at this point?
Well, it is the encouragement. It is the that we would be active participants to secure the peace deal that would be arrived at, to promote it, to provide our assistance, and to open doors of normalization and cooperation, to encourage both the participants, whether Palestinians or Israelis, to undertake the necessary steps to re-engage, but also our partner and the United States to fulfill the vision of a comprehensive peace along the accepted norms of the international community, being the Security Council resolutions and the international legitimacy and international law. For all of those efforts, I can't say that we or others have so far been successful, but we sense that this continuing stalemate is a dangerous situation that can flare at any moment. We've seen in the past where we have had long periods of lull, and everybody thought that the dynamics and the equilibriums that existed could be sustained, and they were proving wrong with very tragic consequences.
The Palestinians have stopped any kind of relations with the U.S. after several decisions before even the settlement statement. They say the deal of the century is just hot air. It hasn't been presented, and it's actually not a plan. How can you still believe that the U.S. can be an honest broker on this issue? Isn't it time maybe for Arab countries, Europe, or the Israelis and Palestinians directly to deal with this issue, because the Trump administration doesn't want to do it?
When the Palestinians broke off their contacts with the United States, this was for a variety of reasons related to UNRWA and financial support. And there have been subsequent, of course, issues that also were not supported by the Palestinians or the totality of the Arab world. But still, one recognizes the important role that the United States has played traditionally, and its ability to continue to play an active role, its ability to interact with all parties concerned, and its general weight as a main, or if not the exclusive, superpower. But I wouldn't comment on what was referred to as a deal of the century, because we really don't have any specific knowledge of what that deal contains, other than the indication that it is a comprehensive deal, that it is one that addresses the issue in a more, let us say, in a more out-of-the-box context, but we would think that we would have to see the deal to be able to comment on it objectively.
Minister Shukri, how do you see energy security as possibly being a diplomatic vehicle for the region?
Well, this is one of, I think, the areas that can promote and generate a higher degree of cooperation between states, especially of the Eastern Mediterranean. And Egypt has been at the forefront. Luckily, we have had major discoveries of natural gas in our economic exclusive zone, and that has promoted a higher degree of cooperation with our partners in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we have introduced the idea of creating an Eastern Mediterranean gas hub to promote cooperation, to promote exploration and interdependency and cooperation. And I believe that this is an area where it can produce a more positive interaction among the states of the region to make full use of their natural resources, to benefit their peoples, but also to address some of the areas of concern. For Europe, for example, the ability to provide constant gas supply to the European gas network, I think, is an important aspect that will also bridge the divide between Europe and the Middle East and create the dynamics of intergovernmental and interstate cooperation.
Are there any sparring countries that you could foresee becoming peaceful due to energy? Any specific ones?
Sorry?
Any specific countries that you see could benefit
we would
diplomatically?
hope that all states of the Eastern Mediterranean will apply themselves on the basis of cooperation rather than on the basis of confrontation or on the basis of trying to extract exclusively their interests at the expense of others. So I think it's a formula that will always lead to disaster because nobody was going to allow the infringement of their rights, or else we will be living under the law of the jungle once again. And I think after in the 21st century and with all of the current mechanisms that are in place, both regionally and internationally, and a rule-based world order, it would seem counterproductive that we revert to policies that can only bring confrontation and conflict and potentially military activities.
Are you referring to a recent deal signed by Turkey with the government in Tripoli, in Libya, going back, which has been criticized for those very reasons? Is this what you're alluding to?
Well, I was answering the question generally, but
I'm asking
if you want to define it in more specific terms, I think our statement was very clear. I think the situation in Libya currently doesn't need any further complication. And the supposed government in Tripoli, though endorsed by the international community, does have to apply itself within the context of the political agreement. And when the political agreement clearly defines the authority of that government to undertake activities and to enter into legally binding treaties, it has to conform to that treaty, or else it loses its legitimacy. So it's for us a very clear-cut legal issue that should be addressed as such. But of course, there are interests. There's no specific infringement on Egyptian interests, but there are interests for other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there is the matter of what is exactly the objective of such an agreement. I think it might have gone into the Guinness Book of Records, and the speed in which there seems to be an effort to try to ratify what is, from a legal perspective, a existing treaty arrangement.
I want to get to a bone of contention between you and Washington over the purchase of 2 Russian Su-35 fighter jets. Egypt is buying them from Russia. The US government has said, if you do so, we're ready to slap sanctions to stop further military purchases. Are you going to go ahead and buy those Russian fighter jets or not?
Well, these are issues that I think you raise out of what has been circulating generally in the media and press circles. These are issues that I think are better dealt with on the basis of what is actually the situation. And I really wouldn't comment any further on that, other than we have a very diverse and important relationship with the United States. We have relationships with various other partners, whether in Europe or Russia or China, and we undertake our relations in full transparency and with recognition of the importance of the strategic relations that exist between us and the United States, but also we have other relationships that we, I think, have a mutual benefit. but on any specific issues that you have raised. And since they are raised
Secretary Pompeo raised it himself, so it's not just me.
Again, these are issues that are dealt with within the context of bilateral relations and are better left to that context.
On the subject of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, I know he also spoke out after the crackdown on Madam Nasser and just made a statement about the importance of freedom of the press. Have you had that conversation with Washington? Has that come up?
We have an ongoing dialogue with the United States on all issues, and I think we have to be careful in how we describe issues. It's always much easier to use somewhat inflammatory narratives like a crackdown. What exactly is the definition of a crackdown? I wouldn't pose it in those terms. When a representative of the media is asked to come in to the public prosecutor to clarify certain issues and is not imprisoned, is not, no action is taken against that or individual or institution, that does not constitute a crackdown. That constitutes the enforcement of the law, and it should be viewed as such. But in any case, our discussions with the United States on all matters pertaining to the reform ongoing and the manner in which the government addresses the issues of freedom of expression, civil liberties, democratization, human rights is a dialogue that we constantly have, and we are always pointing to the fact that these are issues of an evolutionary nature, that there are specificities that must be taken into account, that the same level of development in different countries necessitates a different evaluation, and that we have to deal with these issues in a comprehensive manner. The human rights is not only an issue of civil and political rights, it is an issue of a comprehensive nature, the right to education, the right to housing, the right to economic development, the right to life, which is constantly Egyptians are threatened by and have been the target of fundamentalist organizations. That is a right also that should be protected and should be emphasized.
What would you like to see more of from the United States for Egypt?
Well, again, we recognize the very important relationship that we have, the strategic nature of that relationship, the vast abilities in the United States as a partner and ally, and I think that a great deal of our success depends on having a healthy and cooperative relationship with the U.S. We want to see the same level of interaction and consultations as relates how best to deal with the issues of the region. We'd like to see also greater U.S. investments in what is a lucrative market in Egypt. Being the largest Arab state, it's an immense market, and a market with very strong relationships to the Arab world and to Africa, to create the necessary employment for, again, 60% of the population under the age of 40. So we have economic challenges, and I think the way in which this government has undertaken its economic reform policies demonstrates a willingness and a commitment, but also demonstrates the ability of the Egyptian people to recognize that hardships have to be met, and the confidence that they have placed in the government to be able to have implemented reforms that are now starting to that we are starting to reap the benefits of in a decrease of unemployment and a healthy growth rate.
I want to get quickly, because there's not much time left, the issue of Qatar. Egypt has been one of the countries that impose a blockade on Qatar. Are you seeing any hopes that the situation can be solved? I was just reading what the Egyptian representative told the International Court of Justice just a few days ago, saying that Qatar supported terrorist operations in the Sinai and so on and so forth. So it doesn't seem Egypt thinks Qatar has changed its ways?
Well, we will evaluate the situation very objectively. We always have hope, and we always desire that relationship between the Arab states is a special relationship built on a long history and the commonality of our cultures and the affinity that the peoples have towards each other. But certainly the policies that the Qatari government has undertaken and the effects on the Egyptian people in its harboring of terrorist organizations and activists, in the support it has been lending fundamental organizations, in its interventions in places like Gaza and Libya, has all been destabilizing to the region. If there was a change of policy, if there was a recognition, I can't say that I do see any change in the policy, but we always have hope.
I am getting a very polite halas in my ear, meaning that our time on this session
and I was just starting to enjoy myself.
If you have a 30-second remark that you'd like to make to wrap up, please.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. I think to wrap up, I would say that it is the security and stability of Egypt that will resonate through the region. It is the instability of Egypt that will have create very dire circumstances. Egypt does shoulder its responsibilities in providing an environment of cooperation, of the dealing with the various issues of the region peacefully through negotiations, through compromise. But we have to also be very vigilant in that what has happened in the region and the spread of terrorism. And that terrorism is not only ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That terrorism is the Muslim Brotherhood, is Shabab, is Boko Haram. And again, if the international community is serious in dealing with terrorism, Egyptians have lost their lives. The Christian pilgrims in the Western Desert, women and children have lost their lives in the eastern, northeastern Sinai. We have shed blood because of terrorist organizations, which are unfortunately supported by those who deem that they can utilize those organizations for political purposes. But this genie out of the bottle cannot be contained if we are to focus on terrorism in one area and not to deal with terrorism in a comprehensive manner, addressing all of those organizations. This is an ideological issue and a battle for the prosperity of future generations. But fundamentally, all of these organizations have the same objective and deal and operate under the same ideological principles. So we have to, I think, be cognizant of the dangers they pose in the region and the potential of their expansion into the Mediterranean and beyond.
Thank you. There's so many more questions we'd love to ask, but time is up, and we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Minister Shukri.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the buffet lunch is at Colonne Rooms at lobby level. Med starts again at 2:15. Enjoy lunch.